Hi, team. Miss Vaughn here for yet another recording of an imperfect reading of Beloved. Chapter 15 is going to be focused on baby Suggs. So, chapter 10 was very much focused on baby Suggs, and it was focused on her and the care that she provided for the children and also Setha after Setha arrived from escaping Sweet Home. This chapter is going to be focused on life before the killing of Beloved at 124. And it's going to build on the fact that we've learned that Baby Suggs is very much a pillar of the community. Remember, she makes space in the clearing for people to go out and sing and dance and cry and express themselves and experience joy amidst all of the suffering that they are going through. And she does her sermons that center around self-love. So this chapter is important because this is going to be focused on not only baby Suggs, but the main event that happens before school teacher finds Setha. So if you haven't done this already, you should have because we did it in class. You need to go and search the Four Horsemen, and you also need to go and research uh, a little bit about Jesus because there's lots of Jesus allusions that happen throughout this chapter. And I'm going to be stopping along the way to talk to you guys about some of them. And if we think about Jesus, his whole ethos is filled with benevolence and love and providing for the people. Okay. There's also this parable about how, oh yeah, I should preface that. There's this parable of Jesus that you guys should all know that he has a few loaves of bread and a few fishes, and he's supposed to feed many, many people. And it's one of the miracles that he performs. And so he starts to feed the people, and then the feast that is created, it ends up being able to feed all of the people that he's supposed to when they originally anticipated that there wasn't going to be enough food to do that. So that parable is going to be alluded to throughout this chapter because baby Suggs, she's going to throw a fat party, and what starts out as something that's small is going to grow exponentially throughout the chapter. Okay, chapter 15, page 159. In the back of baby Suggs's mind may have been the thought that if Hallie made it, God do what he would, it would be a cause for celebration. If only this final son could do for himself what he had done for her and for the three children John and Ella delivered to her door one summer night. When the children arrived and no Setha, she was afraid and grateful. Grateful that the part of the family that survived was her own grandchildren, the first and only she would know. Two boys and a little girl who was crawling already. But she held her heart still, afraid to form questions. What about Setha and Hallie? Why the delay? Why didn't Setha get on board too? Nobody could make it alone. Not only because trappers picked them off like buzzards or netted them like rabbits, but also because you couldn't run if you didn't know how to go. You could be lost forever if there wasn't nobody to show you the way. So when Setha arrived, all mashed up and split open, but with another grandchild in her arms, the idea of a whoop moved closer to the front of her brain. But since there was still no sign of Hallie and Setha herself didn't know what had happened to him, she let the whoop die, not wishing to hurt his chances by thanking God too soon. It was Stamp Paid who started it. 20 days after Setha got to 124, he came by and looked at the baby he had tied up in his nephew's jacket, looked at the mother he had handed a piece of fried eel to, and, for some private reason of his own, went off with 2 buckets to a place near the river's edge that only he knew about where blackberries grew. Tasting so good and happy to eat them was like being in church. I love that description. To eat a blackberry is like being in church. Just one of the berries, and you felt anointed. He walked 6 miles to the riverbank, did a slide, run, slide down into a ravine made almost inaccessible by brush. He reached through brambles lined with blood-drawing thorns, thick as knives that cut through his shirt sleeves and trousers, all the while suffering mosquitoes, bees, hornets, wasps, and the meanest lady spiders in the state. Scratched, raked, and bitten, he maneuvered through and took hold of each berry with fingertips so gentle not a single one was bruised. Late in the afternoon, he got back to 124 and put 2 full buckets down on the porch. When Baby Suggs saw his shredded clothes, bleeding hands, welted face, and neck, she sat down laughing out loud. Bugler, Howard, the woman in the bonnet, and Setha came to look and then laughed along with Baby Suggs at the sight of the sly, steely old black man. Agent, fisherman, boatman, tracker, savior, spy, standing in broad daylight, whipped finally by 2 pails of blackberries. Paying them no mind, he took a berry and put it in the 3-week-old Denver's mouth. The woman shrieked. She's too little for that, Stamp. Bowsby soup. Sickify her stomach. But the baby's but the baby's thrilled eyes and smacking lips made them follow suit, sampling one at a time the berries that tasted like church. Finally, Baby Suggs slapped the boy's hands away from the bucket and sent Stamp around to the pump to rinse himself. She had decided to do something with the fruit worthy of the man's labor and his love. That's how it began. Okay, so this is the beginning of her putting together all of the pieces of the party. She made the pastry dough and thought she ought to tell Ella and John to stop by because 3 pies, maybe 4, were too much to keep for one's own. So that's how it starts. Come on over, have some pie. I got lots of pie to be able to feed lots of people, and there's too much for our own little family. Setha thought they might as well back it up with a couple of chickens. Stamp allowed that perch and catfish were jumping into the boat. Didn't even have to drop a line. From Denver's 2 thrilled eyes, it grew to a feast for 90 people. 124 shook with their voices far into the night. 90 people who ate so well and laughed so much it made them angry. They woke up the next morning and remembered the meal-fried perch that Stamp Paid handled with a hickory twig, holding his left palm out against the spit and pop of the boiling grease. The corn pudding made with cream, tired, overfed children asleep in the grass, tiny bones of roasted rabbit still in the hands, and got angry. Okay, so I want you all to start to think about why this party would make people angry, and think about the notion of like being able to fully accept what you think that you deserve. And then also this idea of comparing yourself to other people. So there's going to be some comparisons that happen where the people in the community, they're going to very much be jealous of Baby Suggs, and jealousy is a form of anger. So part of that is rooted in this description here. Baby Suggs, 3, maybe 4 pies grew to 10, maybe 12. Setha's 2 hens became 5 turkeys. The 1 block of ice brought all the way from Cincinnati, over which they poured mashed watermelon mixed with sugar and mint to make a punch, became a wagon load of ice cakes for a wash tub full of strawberry shrug. 124, rocking with laughter, goodwill and food for 90 made them angry. Too much, they thought. Where does she get it all? Baby Suggs holy. Why is she and hers always the center of things? How come she always knows exactly what to do and when? Giving advice, passing messages, healing the sick, hiding fugitives, loving, cooking, loving, preaching, singing, dancing, and loving everybody like it was her job and hers alone. So there's more of that jealousy that's developing in the community of Baby Suggs. Now to take 2 buckets of blackberries and make 10, maybe 12 pies to have turkey enough for the whole town pretty near. New peas in September, fresh cream but no cow, ice and sugar, batter bread, bread pudding, raised bread, shortbread. It made them mad. Loaves and fishes were his powers. They did not belong to an ex-slave who had probably never carried 100 pounds to the scale or picked okra with a baby on her back, who had never been lashed by a 10-year-old white boy, as God knows they had, who had not even escaped slavery, had in fact been bought out of it by a doting son and driven to the Ohio River in a wagon. Okay, so there's this like flawed logic that the community is practicing where they're like, yeah, well, of course, Baby Suggs is able to do all these things for the community because she hasn't had to suffer as much as we have. And so they list all the things that she hasn't had to experience that maybe they have. But we as readers, we know that she has experienced so much pain, so much suffering, and that her ability to love herself and preach that message of self-love is an expression of her freedom. Like if she's going to do anything with her freedom, she's going to start to free her mind as she has her free body. Okay. Free papers folded between her breasts, driven by the very man who had been her master, who also paid her resettlement fee, name of Garner, and rented a house with 2 floors and a well from the Bodwins, the white brother and sister who gave Stamp Paid Ella and John clothes, goods, and gear for runaways because they hated slavery worse than they hated slaves. Okay, so we wrote it on the board. If you guys look over at the whiteboard, that Stamp Paid, he's part of the Underground Railroad, and then Ella is also part of the Underground Railroad. She's the one who helps people get to 124. Stamp Paid is the one who navigates the river. And then the Bodwins, they are a white brother and sister who give 124 to Baby Suggs. It says here that they hated slavery worse than they hated slaves. So if you guys remember to listening to that podcast at the very beginning of the book where it talked about how Abraham Lincoln, he didn't like the institution of slavery, but he did not think that Black people were equal to white people. Some of that sentiment is shown here in the Bodwins, that they think the institution of slavery is terrible, but they don't necessarily think that Black people are equal to white people. Okay, back to the community. It made them furious. They swallowed baking soda the morning after to calm the stomach violence caused by the bounty, the reckless generosity on display at 124. Whispered to each other in the yards about fat rats, doom, and uncalled for pride. The sense of their disapproval lay heavy in the air. Baby Suggs woke to it and wondered what it was she boiled hominy and wondered what it was as she boiled hominy for her grandchildren. Later, as she stood in the garden, chopping at the tight soil over the roots of the pepper plants, she smelled it again. She lifted her head and looked around. Behind her, some yards to the left, Setha squatted in the pole beans. Her shudders were distorted by the greased flannel under her dress to encourage the healing of her back. Near her in a bushel basket was a 3-week-old baby. Baby Suggs wholly looked up. The sky was blue and clear, not one touch of death in the definite green of the leaves. She could hear birds and faintly the stream way down in the meadow. The puppy here boy was burying the last bones from yesterday's party. From somewhere at the side of the house came the voices of Bugler, Howard, and the crawling girl. Nothing seemed amiss, yet the smell of disapproval was sharp. Back beyond the vegetable garden, closer to the stream, but in full sun, she had planted corn. Much as they'd picked for the party, there were still ears ripening, which she could see from where she stood. Baby Suggs leaned back into the peppers and the squash vines with her hoe. Carefully, with the blade at just the right angle, she cut through the stalk of the insistent rue. Its flowers she stuck through a split in her hat. The rest she tossed aside. The quiet clock, clock, clock of wood splitting reminded her that Stampede was doing the chore he promised to the night before. She sighed at her work and, a moment later, straightened up to sniff the disapproval once again. Okay, Baby Suggs, intuitive woman, she can sense something wrong is about to happen. And for us as the readers, we're kind of pulled along to think that, like, oh, she can tell that her community is gossiping about her, but there's going to be something else that is about to approach 124. She was accustomed to the knowledge that nobody prayed for her. For those of us who've talked about it, Kendrick Lamar. But this free-floating repulsion was new. It wasn't white folks that much she could tell, so it must be the colored ones. And then she knew. Her friends and neighbors were angry at her because she had overstepped, given too much, offended them by excess. Baby closed her eyes. Perhaps they were right. Suddenly, behind the disapproving odor, way, way back behind it, she smelled another thing, dark and coming, something she couldn't get at because the other odor hid it. She squeezed her eyes tight to see what it was, but all she could make out was high-top shoes she didn't like the look of. Thwarted yet? Okay, so sorry, we're going to press pause here. Remember way far back, and I think it was chapter 7 that I read for you, where the timelines were closing in, where even in the present, she could also sense things that were going to happen in the future, not just thinking about the things from the past that have influenced her thinking. We see some of this here with the narration that Baby Suggs, and we can think of it as her intuition and anticipation for something bad about to happen, but she can also see these high top shoes that are going to be coming down the road, which is really important for chapter 16. She squeezed her eyes tight to see what it was, but all she could make out was high-top shoes she didn't like the look of. Thwarted yet wondering, she chopped away with the hoe. What could it be, this dark and coming thing? What was left to hurt her now? News of Hallie's death? No, she had been prepared for that better than she had for his life. The last of her children, whom she barely glanced at when he was born, because it wasn't worth the trouble to try to learn the features you would never see change into adulthood anyway. 7 times she would have done that. Held a little foot, examined the fat fingertips with her own, fingers she never saw, become the male or female hands a mother would recognize anywhere. She didn't know to this day what their permanent teeth looked like or how they had held their heads when they walked. Did Patty lose her lisp? What color did Famous's skin finally take? Was that a cleft in Johnny's chin or just a dimple that would disappear as soon as jawbone changed? 4 girls, and the last time she saw them, there was no hair under their arms. Did Ardelia still love the burned bottom of bread? All 7 were gone or dead. What would be the point of looking too hard at the youngest one? But for some reason, they let her keep him. He was with her everywhere. When she hurt her hip in Carolina, she was the real bargain, costing less than Hallie, who was 10 then, for Mr. Garner, who took them both to Kentucky to a farm he called Sweet Home. Because of the hip, she jerked like a three-legged dog when she walked. But at Sweet Home, there wasn't a rice field or tobacco patch in sight, and nobody but nobody knocked her down. Not once. Lillian Garner called her Jenny for some reason, but she never pushed it. She never pushed, hit, or called her mean names. Even when she slipped in cow dung and broke every egg in her apron, nobody said, and nobody knocked her down. Sweet Home was tiny compared to the places she had been. Mr. Garner, Mrs. Garner, herself, Hallie, and 4 boys, over half named Paul, made up the entire population. Mrs. Garner hummed when she worked. Mr. Garner acted like the world was a toy he was supposed to have fun with. Neither wanted her in the field. Mr. Garner's boys, including Hallie, did all that, which was a blessing since she could not have managed it anyway. What she did was stand beside the humming Lillian Garner while the two of them cooked, preserved, washed, ironed, made candles, clothes, soap, and cider, fed chickens, pigs, dogs, geese, milked cows, churned butter, rendered fat, laid fires, nothing to it, and nobody knocked her down. Her hip hurt every single day, but she never spoke of it. Only Hallie, who had watched her movements closely for the last 4 years, knew that to get in and out of bed, she had to lift her thigh with both hands, which is why he spoke to Mr. Garner about buying her out of there so she could sit down for a change. Sweet boy. The one person who did something hard for her, gave her his work, his life, and now his children, whose voices she could make out as she stood in the garden, wondering what this dark and coming thing behind the scent of disapproval. Sweet Home was a market improvement, no question, and no matter for the sadness was at her center, the desolated center where the self that was no self made its home. Sad as it was that she did not know where her children were buried or what they looked like if alive. Fact was, she knew more about them than she knew about herself, having never had the map to discover what she was like. Okay, so remember, because Baby Suggs has not had a whole lot of autonomy in her life, she doesn't even know really her own personal preferences or what she's like as a person. She just knows who she is through the eyes of other people. Could she sing? Was it nice to hear when she did? Was she pretty? Was she a good friend? Could she have been a loving mother, a faithful wife? Have I got a sister and does she favor me? If my mother knew me, would she like me? In Lillian Garner's house, exempted from the fieldwork that broke her hip and the exhaustion that drugged her mind, in Lillian Garner's house where nobody knocked her down or up, she listened to the white woman humming at her work, watched her face light up when Mr. Garner came in and thought, it's better here, but I'm not. The Garners, it seemed to her, ran a special kind of slavery, treating them like paid labor, listening to what they said, teaching what they wanted known. And he didn't stud his boys, never brought them to her cabin with directions to, quote, lay her down, end quote, like they did in Carolina, or rented their sex out on other farms. It surprised and pleased her, but worried her too. Would he pick women for them? Or what did he think was going to happen when those boys ran smack into their nature? Some danger he was courting, and he surely knew it. In fact, his order for them not to leave Sweet Home except in his company, was not so much because of the law, but the danger of men bred slaves on the loose. Baby Suggs talked as little as she could get away with because what was there to say that the roots of her tongue could manage? So the white woman, finding her new slave excellent if silent help, hummed to herself while she worked. Mr. Garner agreed to the arrangements with Hallie, and when Hallie looked like it meant more to him that she go free than anything in the world, she let herself be taken across the river. Of the two hard things, standing on her feet till she dropped or leaving her last and probably only living child, she chose the hard thing that made him happy. Okay, so there's acknowledgement here that this idea of motherhood is not only something that has plagued Setha, but it's also something that has plagued Baby Suggs. And when Hallie buys her out of freedom, it's hard for her because she has no people to go to. And her one son that she has been able to hold on to, he is still enslaved. So she really has to take her freedom and make herself into a new woman. And never put to him the question she put to herself. What for? What does a 60-odd-year-old slave woman who walks like a three-legged dog need freedom for? And when she stepped foot on free ground, she could not believe that Hallie knew what she didn't. That Hallie, who had never drawn one free breath, knew that there was nothing like it in this world. It scared her. Something's the matter. What's the matter? What's the matter? She asked herself. She didn't know what she looked like, and she was not curious, but suddenly she saw her hands and thought with a clarity as simple as it was dazzling. These hands belong to me. These my hands. Next, she felt a knocking in her chest and discovered something else new. Her own heartbeat. Had it been there all along, this pounding thing? She felt like a fool and began to laugh out loud. Mr. Garner looked over his shoulder at her with wide brown eyes and smiled himself. What's funny, Jenny? She couldn't stop laughing. My heart's beating, she said, and it was true. Mr. Garner laughed. Nothing to be scared of, Jenny. Just keep your same ways. You'll be all right. She covered her mouth to keep from laughing too loud. These people I'm taking you to will give you what you need. Name of Bodwin, a brother and a sister. Scots. I've been knowing them for 20 years or more. Baby Suggs thought it was a good time to ask him something she had long wanted to know. Mr. Garner, she said, why you all call me Jenny? Because that was what's on your sales ticket, gal. Ain't that your name? You call yourself? What you call yourself? Nothing, she said. I don't call myself nothing. Mr. Garner went red with laughter. When I took you out of Carolina, Whitlow called you Jenny, and Jenny Whitlow, what his bill said. Didn't he call you Jenny? No, sir. If he did, I didn't hear it. What did you answer to? Anything, but Suggs is what my husband named. You got married, Jenny? I didn't know that. Manner of speaking. You know where he is, this husband? No, sir. Is that Hallie's daddy? No, sir. Why you call him Suggs then? His bill of sale says Whitlow, too, just like yours. Suggs is my name, sir, from my husband. He didn't call me Jenny. What he call you? Baby. Well, said Mr. Garner, going pink again, if I was you, I'd stick to Jenny Whitlow. Mrs. Baby Suggs ain't no name for a freed person. Okay, so we get this whole idea of like naming and renaming that we've touched on a little bit before. And for Baby Suggs, one of the practices of her freedom is going to be to change her name to one that she wants to be able to have and one that feels like she can embody and be herself in. And so the name that has been given to her by the people who have previously enslaved her is not going to cut it for her. And we've talked about this with Beloved and also with Setha, with these feelings and memories of rebirth. For Baby Suggs, when she's freed, when Hallie buys her into freedom, she very much also has these feelings of rebirth where she accepts the fact that her hands are hers now and she can do with them what she wants. And then she also realizes that her heart is beating. All right. I'm going to stop there and then this is going to continue later. We ended on page 167. Bye-bye.